All right, we're live. Another episode of Monero Talk. Tonight on the show, we have Alex Gladstein. He's the Chief Strategy Officer of the Human Rights Foundation. Oh, wait, hold on 1 second. Just got to mute myself over here. All right. Yeah, he's the Chief Strategy Officer of the Human Rights Foundation. He was recently on the What Bitcoin Did podcast. I listened to that interview. That's a great show, by the way, for anybody who's into all these crypto shows, in particular, with a particular concentration on Bitcoin. Over here, we obviously concentrate on Monero.
Yep.
But yeah, I listened to you over there. That was actually kind of the first I really heard details of what the Human Rights Foundation does. But I would love it if I don't want this to be a repetitive situation for you. I'm hoping we could delve into some different topics. Obviously, I want to focus on Monero. I want to keep it interesting for you. But if you don't mind, if you could give it another quick intro. I know you gave a great intro on that show,
Sure.
But if you don't mind, just quick intro of who you are and what the Human Rights Foundation actually is.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me on. A lot of fun. I think Monero is a really important tool, and the people that are building it are onto something very important, in as much as humans need private money, and cash and paper and metal money is obviously disappearing, and we should live in a world where we preserve the values of cash, but in the digital landscape. So I salute all the people building Monero, and hope I can continue to work with the decentralized community as it is, to help bring new tools to human rights activists and journalists who need it. The Human Rights Foundation is a nonprofit that focuses on helping people who live under closed and closing societies. So basically people who live under authoritarian systems, places that don't have separation of powers, or don't have the ability for you to write an op-ed in the local newspaper, or let's say to do a protest against something, or to pressure your public officials to be accountable or to change their policies. A place where private property maybe isn't, a very strong concept. A place where criticizing the government is something that's risky or even dangerous. And the crazy part is that about 4 billion people live in a country that could be classified from a political science definition as an authoritarian government, whether it's big countries like China or Russia, or little ones like, for example, Bhutan, or even, and this is provocative, I suppose, but Singapore is a one-party state, right? So there's all kinds of different authoritarian systems in the world. And, we as an organization view them as less than ideal, to be polite. For humans, we think that humans should live under basically societies that have rule of law and like basically separation of powers, and that people should be free to participate in their government and speak their mind without being afraid of violence, right? So at HRF, we've focused on technology, and how technology can be, on the one hand, a tool for dictators and governments to surveil and repress their people, but on the other hand, how technology can be a liberation tool to help people who are in tough political climates. So I've looked at both extensively, and have, spoken to a lot of people about, for example, the police state that China is building with the help of advanced technology and big data analysis. And at the same time have looked a lot at, for example, encrypted communications, people building virtual private networks, looking at projects like Tor, looking at projects like Monero, projects like Bitcoin, projects that essentially allow people to go and gain an advantage against a nation state oppressor, right? We're going to need things like censorship resistance and privacy if we're going to preserve liberties in the digital world.
That's great. So, I mean, you are the Chief Strategy Officer. What are you actually actively trying to work Bitcoin and Monero and cryptocurrencies into your strategy here on how you guys proceed?
Technology is like a component of what we do. It's an important component. It's not my full-time occupation. As the chief strategy officer, I'm responsible for fundraising, partnerships, marketing, communications, working in the media, kind of helping our organization go forward strategically when it comes to thinking about our programs. And there are a couple obvious intersections. One is that from a fundraising perspective, I think that actually cryptocurrency is playing a key role in this area, both from the perspective of people who've accumulated assets like Bitcoin, who are then going to want to donate them to nonprofits. This is like a really important area to think at and look at, both from like a taxation and also just like ideas around building endowments where people have certain assets, like for example, Bitcoin or Monero that float, of course. And that they may have expectations that these assets might be worth more in the future. So they may look at giving things like Bitcoin to nonprofits as like planting a seed for a future tree, right? At the same time, there's like the obvious, much more Monero relevant case of like, hey, I like your organization, but I don't want the government to know that I'm giving you the money. So this is where Monero comes into play. So I think even on like a brass tacks kind of administrative level, cryptocurrencies going to play a huge role in let's say human rights organizations moving forward. I mean, especially when you think about a lot of like human rights groups operate in very tough political climates where their very existence is illegal, right? So if they're known, then the government can shut down your bank account, right? So my ability to sidestep that entire political economic system and transact in something like Bitcoin or Monero is very useful, obviously. So at the end of the day, for a lot of these folks, what's going to be important is liquidity. And like, once I give you Monero, right, like what do you do with it, right? So that's something we can explore throughout this conversation.
Yeah, and just so I have a better, I know you talked a little bit on the other podcasts, like some of your specific projects. I think you guys spoke about bringing information into North Korea, like actually being boots on the ground, or somehow you guys were bringing but I just want to get, so my question is, in terms of like crypto and Monero specifically, how do you guys see how are you guys going to work that into what you guys do? Is there a particular project you're working on, or is it more about just educating people and letting them know that these tools exist, that Monero exists as a tool for censorship resistant transactions?
Right. At the end of the day, if you're working on Monero because of political reasons, because you believe that humans should have private money and that you view this as something that's related to human rights and a free society, we want to work with you. That's kind of like the very short elevator pitch here. There are going to be different ways to connect with the Monero community. We run a conference series called the Oslo Freedom Forum. I've already spoken to several different people in the Monero community about attending and coming and running some programming where activists who live under dictatorships like Saudi Arabia, Zimbabwe, China, etc., can enter into a conversation with people who are building Monero about the importance of private money. So that's something I'd love to see happen. I think there's also like research that we're going to be underwriting. So the Human Rights Foundation is going to announce shortly a privacy tech fellow that we are going to be launching. It's a sort of a privacy tech fellowship. Okay, so this person is going to spend 6 months with us writing essays that explore privacy technology and its relationship to human rights activism, journalists, things like that, with a special eye towards people who live under really tough political circumstances. So we're going to be looking at Monero tools, the community itself, on-ramps, off-ramps, etc., as well as other privacy currencies and Bitcoin itself, and other projects in the general area. There's going to be research opportunities. There's going to be events opportunities. I think there's going to be several different ways that people working on Monero should see the Human Rights Foundation as, oh, I can like connect to different people through HRF, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. So I'm glad you're talking about Monero in a very positive light. You obviously really understand, I think, the use case of what this technology is supposed to be. Basically the censorship resistance aspects of it. One of the questions I like to ask is why do you think, the Bitcoin maximalists, those who kind of preach these same ideals, you have people like Andreas Antonopoulos, who very eloquently talks about this technology being used as, for all these things we talked about, right? It's like this great liberating technology that will allow people to communicate without censorship. Why do you think he's not a big proponent of technologies like Monero? Or why do you think they're kind of ignoring what seems to be this more truer digital cash, something that's kind of doing what Bitcoin set out to do? Why do you think it's being ignored by the cypherpunks in Bitcoin land, or the self-proclaimed cypherpunks?
Got it. So I can't speak for anybody else. What I can say is a couple observations I've picked up from the last few years. I think that there are quite a few people, including myself, who love Bitcoin and are obsessed with Bitcoin and find it incredible, and at the same time are interested in what other similar technologies can do. I think the problem is that, as you know, as probably the most Monero folks know, most of the other Bitcoin-esque projects are scams and are basically just fraudulent. So it's a very heated emotional environment to begin with. I think that there are a lot of people who are a little too sensitive with their, Bitcoin is the only thing that could possibly work. I tend to agree with them on most things, except for the fact that I kind of view Bitcoin as a financial tool for particular purposes. Okay. I'm not like a slave to it, or I don't, you know what I mean? I'm not like ideological about it. I think it's an amazing, wonderful tool, and it's what I spend most of my time looking at. However, I think especially at this stage in the game, we need other tools. So, I mean, I don't think anybody could tell you with a straight face that Bitcoin, is a amazing privacy technology right now. I mean, is it better than using the banking system? If you have good operational security, I would say yes. But I mean, things like Monero are necessary right now for certain things. And I think hopefully most reasonable Bitcoiners could sort of agree to that like, hey, if there's somebody who really needs a private transaction, that they should be using something more like a Monero, or perhaps one of the other coins in the field, like a Zcash, for example. I think there's really good use cases for both right now. And I think for some reason that's a little hard for certain people to admit, maybe. But I do want to say that I'm like I'm like kind of like a Bitcoin person who is also really interested in Monero, is kind of where I'm coming from. Like, I think the fact that people are building privacy first money is really important from a human rights and freedom point of view. And that the community is so obviously interested in these ideals is huge. I mean, and maybe I think the other thing maybe is that some of the Bitcoiners believe that, like, given enough time, that maybe Bitcoin will become like, through either second layer, advances, or even protocol advances at the base layer, that it'll become private. But I find that hard to believe at the moment. Certainly something I'd like to see, but we're clearly not. That's not going to happen in the next year or two, right? I mean, I think there's some roadmaps out there for Bitcoiners. I don't see why anybody in the Monero community wouldn't want Bitcoin to be more private. I think it's something we should all want, because it's the dominant coin that ultimately has the most liquidity in the places that I care about, right? So if we're talking about helping people who live in a place like, Burma or the Philippines or Venezuela or whatever, the fact is, or Nigeria, the fact is that when we talk about a parallel economy, Bitcoin's the most dominant coin there. So I think we should understand that and hopefully be rooting for it to become more private. But for the folks on the other side, I think they need to understand that right now it's not. Right? Like, if a government wants to spend quite a bit of money, they can track you down, right? using it. Now the question is, you know, how long will this kind of state of affairs last? And I haven't really gotten to speak at length so much with so many people in the Monero community, but you know, is this, I guess to turn it back to you, is there a widespread belief that like Monero will always be very singular, or perhaps, you know, to be fair, something like a Zcash, these coins will be uniquely important, separate from Bitcoin, like, or is this sort of like just right now, that's kind of where it is from where these technologies are from a development perspective? Like, what's your view on that? Like, where do you see Bitcoin in 5 years? Do you think it's not really advanced at all when it comes to privacy, or do you think it has advanced?
Yeah, I think, well, my personal view is that the invention of Bitcoin, the purpose of Bitcoin was, peer-to-peer cash, digital cash. And it got us about 98% of the way there, but it was lacking in its ability to be private and fungible.
Right.
And so we, I'm a believer. I'm a maximalist in digital cash, not in Monero per se. So I'm constantly on the hunt for the one that's doing that the best. So I originally was a Bitcoin maximalist until I realized how transparent Bitcoin actually is, and I just see that as a flaw. Maybe it could be cured, but all signs point to no in terms of what we've seen so far in the Bitcoin community. It just seems like politically it would be very difficult to add true privacy and fungibility to Bitcoin. Just like we saw with the scaling debate, there was a lot of politics there.
Yeah.
I just think it's become, and the Bitcoin maximalists will describe this as a benefit. The fact that
you think that most Bitcoin maximalists believe in privacy?
It's hard to say. I mean, this is where I see the hypocrisy, right? So
okay. Let's actually focus on not just people online, but like coder, like people working on Bitcoin Core, like actual people who are spending their days.
I mean, I don't know. My hope is they do, right? That they're in it for what this stuff is really supposed to be.
Yeah.
And but I think at the same time, they're also fully invested in this project. So it's hard for them to then, take themselves out of it and look at it and say, you know what, maybe Bitcoin won't be able to achieve true fungibility. And then they start to rationalize, well, maybe you don't need that, right? You don't. It used to be that, this stuff needs to be fungible on the core protocol level. And now it's like, well, maybe we could do that on the second layer, and they start to rationalize why it doesn't need to be on the core protocol layer.
I guess because I want to talk more about, I guess, Monero and private money, but to close the loop on this, I think that if you're a Bitcoiner, I think there's reason to be hopeful that Bitcoin will become more private moving forward, but you do need to understand that it takes time, and it's imperfect, and it is something that will clearly take, even if best case scenario, at least 18 months, right, to get to, if not more than that, to get to a really workable privacy situation where you've got a full stack of me sending you money, and the whole way is private. I think there's some cool experimentation in there, and that's where I'd like to see more kind of like and I think there's plenty of this like positive feedback and like kind of a jovial competitive attitude between people working on privacy and Bitcoin and people working on Monero and Zcash. I feel like, coming from the outside perspective as a human rights activist, there's like a bizarre amount of tribalism. It's really strange. I don't see why you, and I see why this statement is controversial, but I guess I don't see why you couldn't think all three of the projects are really cool. So if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, me personally, don't get me wrong. I'm still a Bitcoin, like I said, I want digital money to win.
Yeah.
So if that means that it has to be something like Bitcoin and then privacy is added later, and, Bitcoin has the network effect. It has all, it has the most network effect also in terms of the developers that are working on it. and maybe that's what gets us to the next level, and then privacy is added. Sure, but I just don't see it being possible in terms of adding privacy later on.
One of the things I've been saying is I think we need a whole ecosystem. We need a whole industry of democracy technology, of privacy technology. We need all kinds of people working on all kinds of projects. There needs to be a fierce and vibrant competition. There needs to be a lot of resources flowing into this, because if not, we're all going to lose. And WePay and Alipay and Facebook coin and the Fed coin are going to win. Okay. So, you know, if we don't win, they're going to win. And like, at the end of the day, there might be a lot of squabbles between like people working on privacy wallets for Bitcoin and the Zcash folks and the Monero community. But at the end of the day, we all lose if we don't create something that's workable. It's a workable alternative to the financial system for the average person, because the average person, cares more about convenience. Okay. Most people don't care about privacy. So they're going to slide right down that Orwellian slope, right? To all of a sudden, like, oh my God, I use WePay for everything. Wait a second. That means that the government knows everything about me. Like that's not that far it's not a far-fetched scenario, given that we already live in a country, at least I don't know where you are, but I'm in the United States, in a place where, Facebook and Google, just to name two companies, let's throw in Amazon, know enough about us that if they were weaponized, it wouldn't be that different from what's happening in China right now, right? The difference is that in America, we still have separation of powers and rule of law and individual liberties, and the government can't just like hit the big red button and throw us all in prison. They can in China, and they do. And they're, for example, rounding up all the Muslims in northwestern China right now. So there's a huge difference at the political level. I'm someone who believes that if we're going to fight for a free future, we need both old school human rights and civil liberties advocacy on one hand, and then we also need to build technology to allow us to basically own more of our own data and money and information, and challenge the state and keep the state at bay a little bit. I think we need both. But I think one thing is interesting to dwell on is that I did write this article for Time about why Bitcoin matters for freedom, and I mentioned that that right now, my assertion, and I got into a lot of interesting debates with Monero and Zcash folks on this, was that Xi Jinping can't monitor right now all Bitcoin transactions. And I guess we can take this a couple different ways. I don't really want to back down from that statement, but he's not. So we know this. So people don't get arrested in China today for on-chain Bitcoin transactions, right? So while the Chinese Communist Party might be doing this, we from everything we understand, and I filmed another conversation with a guy named Leo Weiss, he runs the Bitcoin Club in Hong Kong. He knows more than anyone. He knows a lot about what's going on in China with regard to Bitcoin. From what people can understand, the Chinese government hasn't kind of gone there yet. Now, I fully understood that they could, but there's a huge, interesting reason why they haven't yet. And I think if it was easy for them to do so, they would, because Bitcoin and Monero and Zcash, I mean, they represent a parallel economy where people are moving capital out of China. That's like not what the Chinese government wants. So if it was easy for the Chinese government to stop all of this, they would do it. It's not easy. So, you and I don't know what Xi Jinping's thinking. I mean, does he even understand what Bitcoin is? I mean, who knows? Maybe not. But the point is, right now, while there is surveillance at a micro level on chat applications, which is being automated with big data analysis, for some reason, they're not doing that with Bitcoin yet. Now, could they? Yes. And that is scary. And that's why we need to work on both Monero, Zcash, and other alternatives plus Bitcoin. But we should realize that right now, that's not what the Chinese government's doing. And you can say the same thing for according to the folks that I work with who are Venezuelan, the Venezuelan government, which hopefully is in its dying days, the illegal Maduro government doesn't use a company like Chainalysis to go after particular people and investigate the Bitcoin blockchain. So these are important considerations. It doesn't mean that they couldn't change their opinion tomorrow and say all of a sudden, all right, let's do it. But we should understand that loosely, dictators aren't doing chain analysis. I mean, we know the US government is. but it's just something important to understand about like the landscape right now.
Yeah, I mean, my hold on, I'm getting an echo here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm getting a little bit of feedback when I talk to you. Did you change something over there?
No, but I can
Huh.
I can plug in a microphone if you want me to.
If you don't mind. Oh, now we're good.
Okay.
You there?
Yeah.
Yeah, my opinion on that is, that they will be. All governments will
Yeah,
be
and I
doing
think I
that,
agree with you.
and it's just too easy for them to do it. And
Is it? I mean, I thought it was quite expensive and difficult.
well, maybe now, but I think it's something that will be that will improve greatly with time and become.
But I think it's going to be a cat and mouse game. I think people building Monero and Zcash and privacy features on Bitcoin are going to hopefully, I mean, the hope is that we, broadly speaking, as a community that cares about digital cash, will proceed at a pace that's slightly more rapid than these corrupt bureaucracies and the way that they're trying to prevent that from happening.
100%. But I feel like, Zcash and in particular Monero is very focused on that mission. That's kind
Which
of
is very
our core,
laudable and awesome.
right? That's the core mission. Whereas Bitcoin, it's not really their core mission.
No, it's not.
That's my concern there, because it is a cat and mouse game, and right now Monero is ahead, and it intends on evolving as we proceed to fight this cat and mouse game. Whereas Bitcoin seems to be okay with entering this period of where its code can't even be changed any further, right? It kind of sees that as a benefit, right? Because it's the whole digital gold thing, right? So they see one of the benefits of Bitcoin is that it's difficult to change the protocol. And that we're kind of entering this phase where the window will be closing, where you won't even be able to change the protocol anymore. And that's kind of been spun as a positive. And I think eventually it is a positive, but if you're going to win this cat and mouse game, you're going to have to be able to stay ahead and become more private to win.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be really difficult. I mean, Bitcoin has a governance system that's very difficult to seize, as we've seen. It's very decentralized and very difficult to coordinate to change the platform, which I think is a really good feature, not a bug. And I do think you're going to see some really significant changes coming in the next 12 months. I'm pretty sure of it based on what I can see coming out of research conferences and developer meetups. At the same time, I don't think anybody, whether you're an activist, a journalist, a Bitcoiner, whatever, if you care about privacy, you should be rooting and supporting and talking to the folks in the Monero community. I mean, this to me is just so obvious. So that's where I would maybe knock some of the people that I like in the Bitcoin space for being a little too tribal.
I will say one last thing. Really, what this debate ends up coming down to is what we call in the Monero community, perfectly binding versus being perfectly blinding. So it's kind of theoretically impossible to have a coin that's perfectly blinding like Monero, where you don't know whether or not it could potentially be inflated without anybody knowing. Whereas, that's kind of
a good point. I mean, I would say that a lot of the folks that I know who are most ardent about Bitcoin, they often don't even mention privacy as one of the things that they care about. As you're saying, they're more in it for the hard cap, for the 21 million. They're in it because it's really hard to change the rules of the game, and that it's going to have this transparent monetary policy, and that it's going to be hopefully impossible to print more Bitcoin, and that it'll be an alternative to central banking. I mean, I think that's what the hardcore Bitcoin folks want, and privacy to them is kind of like from what I can understand and read, it's like a bonus, but like not the core feature. Whereas I do think there are other people, and I'm pretty sure Andreas Antonopoulos, for example, would be in this camp, that sees privacy as like really core to Bitcoin, like what it needs to be. So I think there is a split there where you have some like Austrian economics folks who are super into like digital gold, and I do appreciate all their observations about Bitcoin for sure. But then you have like people who are more interested in, like, as you're saying, cash, right? So let's keep the idea of me giving you a $20 bill and that being like a very difficult to surveil interaction. Let's keep that alive in 30 years when our kids or whatever and grandkids won't have paper or metal money. It just won't exist. And we know that, right? So we need to invest there should be a Manhattan Project level research, project into keeping private money alive in the digital world. And I think that's kind of, you could argue, I wonder how much resources and how much developer time has gone into Bitcoin and Monero and Zcash compared to the Manhattan Project. I bet it's not that different. It is pretty amazing. And the cool part is there's not like a government with a gun to somebody's head saying, hey, build me a bomb, It's like a bunch of people who aren't under anybody else's thumb doing what they want in a completely decentralized way, saying, hey, we need private money in the future. Trust me, you're going to want this. And I will commiserate a lot with the folks in your community, because I think most people hear about Bitcoin and they're like, oh, that's just for criminals. But Monero, obviously oh, that could only be for criminals. And I think they don't stop to think about what is a criminal, what is criminality, right? It's what a nation state has deemed as unacceptable, right? And I think you can have issues with that in a democracy like the United States, where possession of marijuana and all these ridiculous things are illegal, and much more so in a dictatorship where dissent at its most basic level is illegal, right? So I think people tend to have a bubble mentality, generally speaking. They kind of live in their city, in Chicago or San Francisco, New York, whatever, and they're not really thinking about what an amazing tool Monero could be for somebody who lives in China or Venezuela or Saudi Arabia or something like that. I think they're only thinking of it as well, if you need to use Monero, you must be doing something bad, right? Which always reminds me of the beginning of the internet, right? Where a lot of these TV clips you watch of talk shows and industry reports and investor reports at the time were the internet seems like it's going to be a breeding ground for terrorists and drug dealers and pedophiles, where it's actually at the end of the day, what did the internet do? It didn't empower those people very much, but it did put all of human knowledge in all of our pockets. That's pretty amazing, right? So I think people they're late and they're lagging and largely ignorant about the efforts being waged by people to make sure that our future generations have digital private money. And people in the future will be thankful for what you're doing now, but they don't get it right now. Yeah.
So you kind of already answered my question, but what is your philosophy on that? Are you okay? Are you do you think the coin that wins, if there is only one that wins, should it be perfectly fungible and perfectly private, or do you think there should be these ways to unravel it when necessary for
so I actually think
crimes?
We don't have to speculate that much about this. We can think about cash as a proxy for what a really, really good, or we're never going to say perfect, but an excellent privacy coin in the future might be. I would imagine that there would be a way, if there's an excellent privacy coin, to still surveil that if you have if you've kidnapped both people on both sides, right? If you have if you can physically confiscate somebody's tool that they use to interact with this currency. I'm assuming we're not far enough ahead where it's brain chips or whatever. But if you're sending Monero to someone else, and you're using a computer or a phone or whatever, at some level, someone could kind of watch what you're doing, right? So in the same way, cash was similar, right? Someone could sneak in and see us exchanging dollar bills, but normally we'd be careful about it, and that would be difficult, right? Pre-surveillance state. So humans have always had barter and cash, right? I mean, at least in our modern civilization, in modern history, dating back thousands of years. And I guess you'd have to make a case that that was somehow bad or evil, right? That there would be a reason to get rid of that. And I think it's quite the opposite. I think the ability to have these bearer assets, like paper money, metal money, gold, going back many, many millennia, I think these things are important. I think they allow us to have, to conduct business, to have privacy, to remain independent of a corporation or a nation state. I think this is really, really important. Peer-to-peer money, I think, is really, really important. from a human rights and moralistic viewpoint. And I think it's worth preserving in the future. So what I would say is a future without cash, it would be very difficult for me to imagine that that's not a like crazy police surveillance state. Like if here's what I try to tell people. Like, could you imagine living in a society where all of your financial transactions are owned and surveilled and freezable by somebody else? I mean, most people already live in that world, to be frank, I guess. But really, when you start to think about what could happen if you're going to have no control over your money, you know, and you know, we can sit here in our comfortable Western societies and say something like, well, that could never happen here. You know, we'll be fine. But I'm just looking at what's happening in some of these dictatorships. It's really scary, and I just, it's hard for me to see the disappearance of cash as a positive.
See, I mean, that's my fear with Bitcoin, though, is that it's sold as the great liberator, but it could potentially get us closer to this dystopia that we're describing.
Oh man, I just feel like the people building Bitcoin are not into the dystopia thing.
Yeah, but whether they are or are not, I mean, at some point the technology takes over, and you know, when you have everybody, it's just like Facebook, right? I mean, I don't know if the people behind Facebook, I mean, I don't know necessarily, you know,
compare the Facebook team with the Bitcoin developer team.
All right, but sure, you're trusting in humans, right? I mean, that's what this all comes. The whole point is we really shouldn't have to really have that trust in people's morals, right? It should be that the technology is built in such a way that no matter what people's morals are, the end result leads us in a more positive direction, right? So if Bitcoin isn't built correctly, does it end up that we're all, you know, transferring on what's essentially a transparent ledger that can be?
Yes, if Bitcoin is built incorrectly, yes, it will be manipulated and it will be bad. I'm hoping and have reasonable evidence to believe that like there are enough smart people working on it to make sure that it's not built in that way. But as I was saying before, it's really important that we have massive experimentation and investment and interest in education in this whole area of private money, so that, I mean, we need to be pushing in this area. We need to be having these conversations. We need to be talking about why Monero is important. And I think Monero is like a good canary in the coal mine thing, because like, I mean, if you've convinced somebody that Monero is important, okay, you've done a really good job. Like let's just put it this way: the establishment right now doesn't even understand Bitcoin. Getting them to understand Bitcoin is going to take years, and they're going to all be late on it, in my opinion. Monero is going to be even more difficult, because you're basically taking this idea of digital money and saying it has to have perfect privacy, right? So and I'm sure you've noticed this, a lot of the folks who are proponents of Bitcoin will say stuff like, oh, but Bitcoin's great because the law enforcement can, if they want to, you know, use it to track down people, which you must find amusing. I don't think this is a positive thing. Like, I think that this, to me, my hopeful self is saying that like, this is like a temporary stage in Bitcoin's life where, yeah, it can be used to track people down. But I don't think that's a good thing. But it's funny, there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin community who are like, who hold on to this as somehow like a positive thing. And I think that's wrong. I don't think we should be going to like regulators and saying, oh, don't worry, like, you know, Bitcoin's totally transparent. Like, this seems to be flawed. Like, the goal is that it should be private. So that is, as a human rights activist, it should be. So you've seen some of this, right? It's kind of weird.
Yeah. It's the ultimate argument that's made in you know, at these congressional hearings and all that. You know, it's the argument that's eventually made. Well, don't worry, Bitcoin will actually help you, you know, fight crime, because it's actually transparent and you can track things.
It's more than the coin. Look, there's some people who are very religious and very tribal about the project they're working on, which I totally understand. But it's about the kind of person that would want private money, private digital money. Like, we need more of these people. We need more people to realize what will happen if we don't have it. It's one of these things where it's like, you don't realize how bad it is until you don't have it anymore, right? I think that that's what it's kind of going to be like. And, just generally speaking more broadly about like the way the internet works today, it's just astonishing to me when I look down at my phone and all these apps I use, with the exception of a couple that are obviously like privacy focused. Yeah, that like we live in the age of cloud computing where someone else owns and processes and can seize and monitor and surveil our data, like whether it's Facebook or Google Maps or my banking software, whether it's financial, location, behavioral data, what I'm eating, whatever. I mean, whatever people are gathering about me today, I don't own, someone else owns it. It's in some giant data center somewhere. So I do really think we need to shift to data processing more generally in a way that's distributed in perhaps like obviously like a node-based decentralized network. So I'm really, I follow Bitcoin for that reason, because I think it's providing an alternative model, especially with like second layer technologies that can help it scale. Like for example, Lightning. I do think it's providing a compelling alternative model for like what we're up against. Because again, like Monero, look, if Monero becomes something like PGP or Signal, which in 10 years is used by a tiny minority and isn't really that popular, I think it will have failed. In the same way that I kind of think, I mean, Signal's awesome, I use it, but if it's to be victorious, it's got to be used by like most people, So I do think that we want encrypted communications. We want censorship resistant storage. I mean, IPFS, another really cool project. Like I would imagine most Monero people would be interested in, the ability to like upload something online and not have the government be able to take it down. Like that seems cool. I think there is like a family of these technologies that need to be kind of seen in unison, right? And I just feel like at the end of the day, Bitcoin's one of those, Monero's one of those. They're going to compete. They're going to eat each other up. But they are in this area that I would want to call like, democracy technology, basically, like, or something like that, where, you've heard of like health tech and ed tech or whatever, green tech, clean tech. I think we should have a concerted effort to make like a dem tech where, hey, this is an area where we think you can make money, and you can also protect civil liberties for you and for your future generations. In the same way that clean tech is that idea for the environment, or health tech is that idea for the healthcare system, or whatever. Like I think we need a very large scale effort by people from both investors, coders, users, marketers all over to get involved with this. It's so important.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed, but I titled the video "Should Bill Gates Donate to the Monero Project?" That was my way of saying, you have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation; they're doing amazing things, and you touched on this a little bit in your podcast about impact investing. Why not? Why doesn't he, donate millions of dollars to helping bring Monero to life?
So,
I mean, the impact would be tremendous.
So I'm going to give most folks, and I don't want to single out the Gates Foundation, but like I'm going to give most large scale humanitarian organizations the benefit of the doubt and say that the decision makers are just not very educated about things like Bitcoin and Monero. They don't understand how they work. They don't understand what their ultimate purpose is. They might view them as a scam, or like as just way too volatile, or something only criminals use. Like I really, or that they would like balk at the very idea of even doing something legitimate with it. They feel like it's somehow illegitimate. I really doubt that folks at like places like the Gates Foundation have sat down for 6 hours and said, let's learn about Monero and how it could be useful for us. I just don't think those meetings have happened, dude. So like I think the question is a little too early, but I will say for foreign aid, think about it this way. So today, if you're the Gates Foundation or the State Department or something, and you're supporting farmers in Rwanda, for example, who are, entrepreneurs, okay? Today, if you want to make a big gift to do that, you want to send money, it goes through the banking system, through the Rwandan banking system, which is controlled by Paul Kagame, who is a dictator who won his last election by like 99.9% of the vote and has like beheaded his political opponents and basically started all these wars. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible, corrupt dictator. So you have to work with this guy. So the money has to go through him. Then he gets to decide how much of a cut he takes. And he gets to decide, oh, who it goes to. And he has total control over that. This is the current financial system. You know, this is basically what it is in its extreme form. Now, through things like Bitcoin and Monero, we have the opportunity to sidestep that entire thing and just go peer-to-peer with people. You want to help people? Great, help them directly. All they need is a phone that's advanced enough to have, you know, basically, you know, a basic wallet, an open source wallet, and they can send and receive, right? At least with Bitcoin, right? So it's like this idea that we can just skip that entire process is truly remarkable. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, will Kagame start cracking down on this? Probably at some point. But like, there's not a whole lot he or she can, you know, these people can do. Like, you know, what are they going to do eventually? It's amazing. We can even look at China today. Like there's been so much money moved out of China, you know, through Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, that in this exact idea, like either through commerce or just to get their money out without the government controlling it. Like we can ask, what has the Chinese dictatorship done? I mean, they haven't certainly pursued it with all of their might, you know, and we have to say to ourselves, well, maybe they will, but they certainly haven't yet. And it's a little bizarre. So we're kind of in a strange time where I don't know if the Communist Party has sat down for 6 hours and said something and you know, really tried to understand what Monero is and how it works and what it does. I think most decision makers are just haven't done that yet. I mean, and it's not even something you could do in 6 hours. It took me like 7 months to really grasp what Bitcoin was. Okay. And, you know, forget about Monero or something else, but even just Bitcoin, it took me a long time to figure out why it was so amazing. We're talking many, many months. It's like I mean, you could say that these things are like like physics or chemistry, right? You have to learn about monetary policy and game theory and incentives and energy use and, you know, cryptography. And you have to learn about, you know, the way currency works and privacy. I mean, these are all like the people who built Monero had to learn or were experts in all of those things. So it's a very complicated thing. And, you know, I get this idea that like, oh, at one point it was like sending an email was mind-boggling and difficult. And now you can do it with a swipe. But it's pretty easy for me to explain to somebody why an email might be useful, right? Like, oh, you can just send a message to somebody around the world. It's a little more difficult to explain why you need an alternative money system. Like that's a totally different conversation. So I can understand why there's been so much flack, right? And I think, unfortunately, folks in the Monero community are going to continue to meet this resistance, which is either going to be ignorance or like really hostile opposition to what you're doing, which is unfortunate, but, you know, keep going.
So just to shift gears real quick,
Sure.
You mentioned democracy tech. Do you think there's any other uses for blockchain? I know maybe you don't like that term. Blockchain tech in improving democracy, maybe kind of solving the one person, one vote problem, allowing for online voting, kind of moving some societies closer to direct democracies. Do you see any evolution there with this technology?
I don't want to say something that makes me sound like an idiot in 20 years, but I will. Look, I don't think if you don't need censorship resistance, I don't think you need a blockchain, right? So I think Satoshi Nakamoto had to use a blockchain because it was the only way to make decentralized money without someone in control, right? And the creators of Monero, like, you know, obviously wanted to improve upon that idea, right? So they also needed one, right? So a lot of the blockchain projects, though, at the moment are just nonsense. Almost all of them are just total nonsense. And it's like some corporate division of some company ordering someone to work on blockchain because they've heard it in the news or something like that. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but that's literally what's happening. And there was someone online who mentioned that I can't remember who it was, but it was someone who mentioned that it was sort of like a cargo cult, right? Like in World War II, when American forces would be heading out towards Japan, and they would stop on these little islands, and the locals wouldn't really understand like why were there planes coming, or how did they communicate? They didn't know how radio worked. So they would do like dances and worship and sacrifice and try to encourage the gods or whatever, right? The troops that come by to give them goods and services, right? So this was like a cargo cult was what it was called. So I think the blockchain today, the word blockchain is like a cargo cult. Like most people, if someone tells you they're like a blockchain expert or they're working on blockchain or something like that, it's like a certain tell that they don't understand it. It's kind of funny in that way. But if someone is like a blockchain expert or is lecturing about blockchain or something like that, it's almost like an immediate signal that they don't know what they're talking about. It's kind of crazy. To a lesser extent, cryptocurrency, but still the word crypto, very overused. I mean, people will sit there for 2 hours and talk about crypto as if it's something real. Like, what are you talking about? Are you talking about Monero or Bitcoin or Zk? Like, no, they're talking about they're basically usually talking about Bitcoin with a couple attributes of their favorite things. And like, it doesn't exist. There is no such thing as crypto. It's not a real thing. So I think being specific is going to be very helpful for us in this like next phase of working on these technologies. We should really be clear about what we mean, and catch-all terms like crypto and blockchain are really unhelpful to our mission. Like, people should be talking about Monero and private money as opposed to like crypto. Like, what happens is like people get confused, and people think that Bitcoin's attributes, for example, whether it's being immutable or having a hard cap or being censorship resistant, they kind of blur that into all these other projects. So they're like, oh, it's on a blockchain, so it's like censorship resistant. It's like almost all blockchain projects are not censorship resistant, like almost all, right? So there's an educational problem here that I think needs to be addressed through being more specific. And I think it's really important for like students.
Yep. Hello.
For, like, people at universities.
You cut out for a second.
Oh.
Still there?
No, just like being specific about which projects we're talking about is really important, especially for people who are learning. Because like when I first started learning about blockchain or whatever, there's just endless videos that are really unhelpful, right? And like, it's hard to find, it's actually really hard to find good resources, which is kind of crazy because Bitcoin is more than 10 years old. But there are some for sure. And maybe that's something that the Monero community wants to invest more time and effort in is, and it's hard when you're in a decentralized community with no leader, with no like obvious leaders, right? But I do think that like explaining to the layperson why Monero is important is going to be really key. Because even if Monero fails, the idea is never going to die. Okay, so even if Bitcoin fails, I don't think it will, but like even if it fails, all the time I've spent learning about it has been 100% worth it, because I've learned about why decentralized money is important and why we should have an alternative money system where we actually have more control over our money than a government. So in the same way, even if Monero fails for some reason, like you've been pursuing an important mission, like private money in the digital world, really important.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on all those points and how you described the misuse of blockchain tech. But how about for democracy itself, these ideas that online voting can be improved?
Yeah.
Perhaps maybe it's something built on top of Bitcoin or Monero. So, if we're using a reliable chain, do you think there's things to be done there that will come out of Bitcoin or Monero?
So voting is a mechanism, right? So when we talk about a democracy, like a government run by the people in its most basic sense, right? At the very minimum, we talk about a representative democracy. We talk about the leaders being accountable to the people, right? We talk about civic duty. We talk about citizens being able to at least elect their leaders and then have oversight over them and being able to toss them out if they're bad. These are the basic concepts of what a working democracy should be. The voting is kind of like the last step. It's sort of like the cherry on top of a democracy, a functional democracy. More important and underlying the voting process are things like separation of powers, constitutionalism, rule of law, free expression, civil society organizations. So if you don't have these things, but you have a vote, the whole thing's a sham. I mean, the North Korean dictator has a vote every year and forces all the North Korean people to vote for him. Voting itself is just a mechanism, and it can certainly be a tool for non-democratic governments to try and pretend to be democratic. All kinds of dictators try and rig elections. What you can't rig is free expression and separation of powers, you know? So I think this translates actually really well to the digital world. When we talk about governance, in the political world, like let's say out here with us, humans have been experimenting with decentralized governments for thousands, you know, since Cleisthenes in ancient Greece had this idea that we should be ruled by rules, not rulers, right? That was 2,600 years ago. We've been tinkering with this idea ever since. And, you know, lo and behold, today, more than half the world, or about half the world, lives under what we would call like a decentralized political system, maybe a liberal democracy of some kind, which is an unbelievable progress, amazing revolution. In the digital space, I think you're going to see something similar on a much more compressed time scale. But the general idea is that decentralized governance is important, and it's kind of counterintuitive. So take this example. You have a 7-year-old child, and you ask them, what society would be more safe? The one with tons of rules and lots of police, or the one with less rules and less police, right? Of course, the 7-year-old's going to say the one with like a lot of police and a lot of rules. But in reality, terrorism and corruption breed in dictatorships, not in democracies. See that? So it's sort of counterintuitive. And I think the same thing is going to be true of information and of money. I think distributed, decentralized networks that govern information and money are going to be better for humans than highly centralized tyrannies where there's arbitrary power. This is just something I deeply believe. So when it comes to like blockchain or like you know, let's say in the voting area, again, it's just a sort of final mechanism for what's underneath. So could distributed voting that's truly decentralized be useful? I mean, it could be, certainly. I think that that's a really tough nut to crack. I mean, people have been trying to for a long time. I also think there are things to be said for centralized voting authorities. I'm not someone who believes everything should be decentralized. I think money should, but I don't think everything should be. I think institutions are useful, and when there's like clear accountability, that might be helpful for society. So at the end of the day, like, you know, it's all about the security model, right? For these things, you know, you'd have to have such a robust security model for a decentralized voting mechanism, and it would have to be doing something that is on top of a foundation of other things that are similarly decentralized, where there's like a really good foundation for it. So I would say that most of the projects that I've seen in this space, not all, some are interesting, but most of them are like, you know, done by some government or, you know, some company that clearly tried to just get in it for the PR purposes. Like you've seen this in like Africa and stuff, like, oh, we did like a vote on the blockchain. It's like, no, they didn't, you know, like, so I would be cautious. But yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, decentralized voting, it's a cool idea. I just think the security model would have to be like insanely robust, and I haven't really seen that yet.
How about just the your opinion on the philosophy, you know, behind it as well? Like, do we want to move closer to, you know, if these technologies worked, do we want to move closer to direct democracies, or is that a problem? I mean, I don't know if you have an opinion there. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Kind of like rule by the majority versus protecting the minority.
I think voting is this sort of mechanism, and it's kind of the last and least most important part of a democracy, ironically. You can have too much of it. So I live in California, and Personally, I mean, when we get these, we look to see what we're voting on. It can be kind of ridiculous. Like, it takes me a lot of time to research, and that's the point. We should have civic duty, and we should sit down and we should research. Like, should we or should we not like dam off this reservoir to make a trade-off between water price and protecting the environment? But do I really think that the other several million people in the Bay Area are going to make the right call on that? I don't know. Like, it's clear that they haven't on a lot of different public policy issues. So I think what's more important than like one vote, one person is like separation of powers. I think that's just so key. Look, I mean, we live in a country, or there are many countries around the world that have, the printing press and the independent media are different from the people who make the laws, who are different from the people who execute the laws, who are different from the military, who are different from the justice system. I mean, at the end of the day, this stuff is more important than the act of voting. I mean, voting is a I mean, how would you say it? It's like, it's an essential, but not complete part of democracy. Like, you do need it in the end. It is this sort of cherry on top mechanism, in my view. But at the end of the day, it by itself, it's fairly useless. Again, all dictators have votes. I mean, they all force people to vote, or you can. It's like, that's why it's a free and fair elections. Like, for example, in Venezuela, what they've been doing for like 15 years is all the most popular potential rivals to Hugo Chavez when he was alive, they'd be like disqualified from running for some reason. This is what they do in Iran. The mullahs in Iran have like this sort of like fake parliament, and they only let people into the parliament, or you're only allowed to stand for election if you've passed like their muster, right? So there are plenty of ways to game this. At the end of the day, the key thing is separation of powers, so that there is no revolutionary council, so that there is no Chavez, that there is no one group of people who decide who can run, right? So these things are just really, really key for us to have like an authentic democracy.
So I guess to wrap this up, you touched on it a little bit in the beginning, but how could the Monero community get more involved in the Human Rights Foundation? Are there things we can do to kind of partner up? Are there ways we could work together? Are there projects we can work on together? What could we do?
There's write to me by email, and then we can start communicating, on Signal or however else you want to talk. I'm alex@hrf.org. Like I said, I've already met some amazing people in the Monero community. We're hopefully going to have some of you out at the Oslo Freedom Forum at the end of May in Norway, where you're going to get a chance to meet people fighting for freedom and liberties in very difficult environments all around the world, and talk to them about what you're working on. Talk to them about private money. I think most of them find that very interesting. Immediately they will understand why this is valuable. Whereas when you talk to somebody in like Denmark or Japan or Florida, they might be like, why would I want that? Like, isn't that just for drug dealers? When you talk to someone who lives in a totalitarian or like authoritarian state, they're going to be like, oh yeah, sign me up. That sounds amazing. So I think you'll really enjoy it, and it'll give you hopefully some inspiration to keep doing what you're doing.
Sounds good. Well, thanks, Alex. I think we'll wrap it up. It's been about an hour. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, it was super fun.
And hopefully we'll stay in touch. And how do I find out more about the Oslo?
It's oslofreedomforum.com.
Okay.
And there's like, we have them around the world. We have a one-day event in Mexico next month, or this month, I guess. And
you come to New York too, I think I heard. Is that?
I do occasionally. Yeah.
Is there a conference being held here in New York?
We usually do an event in September. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'll join that one. I'll reach out to you about that one.
Yeah. We should have like a little meetup there. That'd be fun.
All right. Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
I
really appreciate it. All right. Take care.